going to bed tonight, but thank you.
Turning Point USA at San Diego State University, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing conservative ideas and philosophies to liberal institutions.
Yay!
My name is Kiara, and I run the chapter here at San Diego State University. Yay! We bring these ideas to campus by tabling regularly, having general body meetings, and hosting fantastic speakers every once in a while. So thank you for coming out tonight. If you ladies just want to take turns and talk about who you are while you're here and why you think gun rights are women's rights in like a short summary, because we're going to get into the details of that throughout the discussion.
Hey, oh, that's on. Okay, wonderful. First off, thank you all for coming. I'm looking out, I'm trying to see. We had a shooting event right before the speaking event, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces who came back to hear us speak. So I'm glad we didn't scare you off at the shooting event. You guys did such a great job. That was a lot of fun. So like Kiara said, my name is Amy Robbins. I am the founder and CEO of Alexo Athletica. Now I'm sure as you're looking up here, you're like, oh, Antonia looks so cute. Look at these cute shoes. Look at this great dress. Amy, you got so dressed up for us tonight. Well, okay. Yes, I'm in my activewear, but I promise you this is not just normal activewear. I am the CEO of an athletic wear company, but we do activewear with a twist. And this is my activewear, and we will get to that here in just a second. So we're here tonight to talk about why gun rights are women's rights. And that's such a great topic, because I remember when you first came to me, you were like, you know what, gun rights are women's rights, and you kind of coined this phrase, and it was such a novel idea, because I never really thought about it in those terms. Just a really brief story. I grew up around firearms. I grew up in Texas. I grew up shooting. Never really made them I never incorporated them into my lifestyle by any means. But in 2014, I started hosting a lifestyle show that focused on firearm ownership for millennials. So I kind of started getting a little bit more of a mindset about guns, and I was getting more comfortable with them. I started learning how to shoot them, but I never really thought about this notion of concealed carry, or really how to incorporate them into my life. The extent of it was my husband would have to show me how to use a gun every time before he left to go out of town. So fast forward to 2015, I was training for the Dallas White Rock Marathon. I'm an avid runner, and at this point in my life, I never carried a self-defense tool with me on my body. I never thought about it. I thought that I was very safe. I lived in a very safe neighborhood. Actually, I lived in the middle of nowhere, and so I got up just like I did every single morning before the sun came up. I put on my shoes and I headed out the door for what I thought was just going to be a normal run. So as I'm going down the road, I remember very vividly, I was rounding this corner, and it's very, very quiet out there. That's the time where you get to think and to process everything and get your wonderful run in. But I remember hearing a car behind me coming up, and I was like, oh, that's unusual. And not a lot of people are driving out here. I mean, we were out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember looking behind me, and it was a van. It was like a big white work van. And so I'm thinking, okay, there's nothing around here. I don't know what they're doing out here, but okay. But you know how you just kind of perk up just a little bit when something seems out of the normal. Well, this van slowed down. They rolled down their windows, and there's about 7 guys in this van, and they started making extremely harassing comments. They started making the cat calls, and they started just looking at me with intentions that didn't seem great in their eyes, and I got a little nervous about it, but then they drove off. I was like, okay, that was a close call. But then I really started getting a little bit more nervous when I saw them get to the end of the street and they circled back around, and I was like, uh-oh. That was at that moment that I had my oh crap moment. Because it was in that split second when I started thinking, okay, what are my options right this second? I didn't run with a cell phone. I didn't have any mace. I had nothing on my body. So I was like, okay, I can jump this barbed wire fence. Maybe, I know I can't fight them off. I know I can't outrun them. What are my choices here? And so I just started praying. That was my best choice. I was like, God, you have to protect me, because this is, if this does escalate beyond the cat calls and beyond the harassing comments, I don't know what I'm gonna do. It was the first time in my life I ever felt defenseless and helpless, and I absolutely hated that feeling. So I tell everybody my story ended there. I don't have this big dramatic ending to that story, thank God. Mine ended with the harassing comments and the catcalls, and then they drove off. But I turned around and I hightailed it back home, and I said, okay, I hated that feeling. I am never gonna let this happen to me again. And it was the first time in my life that I started thinking, okay, what are my options? Like, I started thinking through self-defense tools, and I said, okay, well, I could get mace, but is mace really gonna work against 1-on-7? Is a stun gun really gonna work on 1 against 7? Nope. And I was like, this is suddenly starting to make sense to me why all this knowledge about firearms was into my life. And I said, I want the great equalizer, because at that moment, I would have needed a great equalizer. And so that is why gun rights are women's rights to me, because I wanted in that moment to be able to have the choice to choose how I wanted to defend and protect myself. And for me, the firearm was the option. And so when I went back, I quickly did research. I found that 80% of women runners and walkers have had very similar experiences to me, that they felt like their safety had been threatened. And yet nobody in the activewear space was doing anything to make their mission about keeping women safe at this point. So I said, fine, I'm gonna invent some activewear that you can carry, a self-defense tool, including a firearm, if that is your choice, because I'm all about a woman's right to choose how she wants to defend herself. And so, yeah, so we got to work, and we came up with the company Alexo Athletica, and Alexo means to defend and to help. And our entire mission and branding is about empowering women, and now men, we have a men's line as well, but keeping women and men just living a confident lifestyle when it comes to how they choose to defend and protect themselves. And so that is a very long way of letting you all realize like why this topic is so important to me, and why this is like one of my favorite events to come and speak to, because if I can get more of you to be proactive in your approach to your self-defense, I was reactive, but I want more women to be proactive. I want you to start thinking about it now before you get followed and harassed and something happens to you. That is my heart, and that is why I'm here sharing this story with all of you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So my story, kind of, she was talking about her background. I would say kind of the opposite for me when it came down to, yes, grew up in Dallas, Texas, actually in the area. But for the most part, my parents are immigrants, so Nigerian immigrants. And I grew up mostly, I would say, had no, general knowledge of most firearms, because I wasn't around firearms. My family didn't really have firearms with them. Again, they're from Nigeria, so completely different idea of the Second Amendment and all of that. Just did not grow up around that. For the most part, it was what I saw in the media, which was always negative when it came to firearm ownership. And so it wasn't really, though, it wasn't until I was in college that a lot of that type of thinking changed. And I grew up very much actually a Democrat, very much anti-gun. And again, my family didn't have any type of background in with that, but it was really because of my own experience. I'm a sexual assault survivor. And so really throughout my life, one thread that I've seen throughout most of that time has been this disempowered young girl who was desperately trying to find her power back. And so I went through different means of trying to find that power back. And one of the biggest ways I did was going through the feminist movement, be very much a feminist in college. And it was actually, though, through feminism that finally made me realize that if I truly wanted to empower myself and other women, particularly on college campuses, because at that time, it was 2011, 2012, President Obama had pushed a very big study a national study of figuring out this epidemic that we have on campus sexual assault, and whatever you have on that, still it exists. And for me, though, was, as a sexual assault survivor, I didn't want anybody to ever have to go through what I had gone through, and the years and decades of repercussions that comes with being a sexual assault survivor. So I wanted to be a part of that movement of doing something, right? And so through that, I was in the feminist circles of college campus, completely in female empowerment, But anytime a conversation ever came down to what can we do proactively, what can we do when it comes to the woman, how can we defend ourselves? And if I talked about firearm ownership, the conversation ended. It was done, or there was an adverse reaction to it. For the most part, it was an adverse reaction. And so that made me start doing a lot more digging and realizing that this conversation was never gonna honestly be different other than focusing on the perpetrator, which it should, but it can't only be that and that alone. It can't be about my options of making sure that someone doesn't hurt me is if they decide to not do that or not, right? I want to know that because we live in a sinful world and people sin and are gonna do evil things, me, who's competent, who's able to have the capacity to defend myself, I should have more than just a rape whistle that I received in freshman year orientation to defend myself. And I shouldn't have to wait till 911 actually, picks up and is able to maybe send a police officer 5 to 7 minutes at best later on. So I decided that I need to be a part of this Second Amendment movement, and it really, it's a big story all from there, but that was me as a college student, and I got into the campus carry movement, and through that, even when people wanted to make it about one side or another, again, I grew up a Democrat, etc., it always came down to liberty for me. It came down to the concept of if you understand individual rights and liberty, then you're going to understand that you have your very own human right to defend yourself and your livelihood, and none of those other rights are going to be able to exist without life. So you need to protect and defend life. And that's what I want to become an advocate for, is to be able to defend and protect those who don't have a voice. And those are particularly usually are women. And so that's why gun rights are women's rights, because women need to be protected and they can protect themselves if we have the tools to do so.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go into our discussion questions. So you basically answered the first question that I had, so we'll move on to the next one. Based on your experience in advocacy, activism, and entrepreneurship, what is the hardest and easiest part about teaching women the importance of their Second Amendment rights?
What I've found along this journey for a lot of women is, first and foremost, like getting them into the mindset to even start thinking about their safety and their protection. It's not something that we just love to sit around and talk about. And it's not something, I don't think, that's on the forefront of a lot of women's brains until, like Antonia and I both talked about, both of us had this aha moment. Something happened in our lives that it was the tipping point, and we actually started thinking about, for her, it was how to take back that power. For me, it was like, I don't ever want this to happen again. I want to be proactive moving forward. And so I think it is truly moving people from a reactive mindset into a proactive mindset has been something that we deal with on a daily basis. And it's a good challenge to have, because I really do see the opportunity is there. I don't want to see anything bad happen to anybody, but women in particular. And when I start to hear these arguments that people are telling us, women shouldn't have a firearm. Women aren't safe if firearms are around. If a woman carries a gun, they're more likely to die than with the firearm in their presence. And I don't appreciate that argument, because I really think that argument is underestimating women. It's underestimating our strength, it's underestimating our abilities, and I do believe that in the hands of a trained, proficient person, that a firearm can be a fantastic tool. It's one of many tools that can be used to defend yourself, but kind of like Antonia said, the Second Amendment is so important because it helps everybody recognize that we have this right to defend ourselves. And so, yes, some people may choose the firearm, some may not choose the firearm, but at least we have that underlying understanding right now in this country that you do have the right to defend and protect yourself, because a lot of people around this world don't have that opportunity. And so it became very, very important for me to start pushing women to start exercising that right. That's why concealed carry is at the core of what we do with Alexo, because I say if you don't exercise your rights, you're gonna lose your rights. So whether that means getting a firearm and keeping it at your house for home protection, or whether you decide to make that next step in your journey and actually carry the firearm with you, whether it's in a bag, whether it's on your body, but you've gotta exercise that right, because it then becomes important to you. And when someone starts wanting to take that right away from you or take that power away from you, you're gonna fight like hell to keep them from doing that. And that's why I'm such a big proponent for women taking that step in their life, even if they're afraid of it, even if they're fearful, because it was such an empowering thing for me to learn how to operate a firearm, to be able to say I can defend and protect myself and not wait for somebody else to do it for me. And so I think that's why that is so important to me.
Antonia?
Yeah, I love that she said empowered, because that was part of my journey, right? Was in 2017. I mean, that's exactly the feeling that I received, and that's what a lot of women that I talk to, hundreds of women that I talk to in outreach of, I started empowered because I felt empowered. I knew that not only if something ever happened to me again, or if I was in that situation, I would have something, a tool that would be effective and be able to help me in that situation versus waiting for somebody else to defend and protect me. Not that those things are bad, but it's important that we talk about the fact is that I'm married now and everything, and my husband's not always gonna be here. It's not always gonna be around to defend me, even though he might want to. So I think it's so important that, for so long, Amy was being really nice about it, but honestly, it's sexist narratives. It's sexist narratives that have been pushed to say that if there are women with firearms, that, like you said, that they're more likely to use that firearm against them and then use it for self-protection, etc. All those type of things are just saying that you as a woman are not able or capable or competent enough to train and do what you need to do to use a tool, and that's what a firearm is, a tool, in a way that would be effective in your self-defense. And look, the thing is though, the numbers don't lie. The numbers show that the numbers go from at least 500,000 to up to over 1 million people a year are using firearms in self-defense. That's just across the board, but even more specifically women, an average of 200,000 women a year are using firearms for self-defense. And most in those situations are not even pulling the trigger in those situations. They're using it because there was this man or individual who thought that they could pull one over, right? Should be able to, take over that person because they were vulnerable or defenseless in some way in their eyes. And then once they had that firearm, we quickly realized that they weren't gonna do that. So that's why it's so important that we push against this narrative, right? That shows that as a woman that, despite all of the things biologically, that's why it's so important, especially nowadays, biologically, pound per pound, you have, as a woman, less lean muscle mass than a man. And so we have to equal the playing field when it comes down to it, and a firearm is a way of doing so. It's not the only way, but it is one way. But if we don't even come to the realization of that biological difference, then I think this is where a lot of people tend to think that it's not something that's really for women, or doesn't need to be for women, when it really should be one of the most important tools that we have in our place. And we are blessed in a country who not only says that in the Second Amendment, look, this is not a right that we're giving you, this is a right you already have just for being a human being, a natural right that you have as a human being, and we're supposed to protect that right. And that's what the government should be doing in all levels. They're not, but that is really the limited government that we're supposed to be having enacted, is a government that protects our rights. And there are so many countries that they don't even think about things like that. So we're so blessed to be in a country who at least says in our Bill of Rights to protect something that's so important to us.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Thank you. Next question. How have gun laws changed in the last 10 years? What changes do you predict will happen in the next 10 years? Or if you want to keep it a little more local, what will happen after this election?
Ooh, yes.
And what effects do you think that this will have on women's Second Amendment right?
I knew he was gonna, Antonia, why don't you do that? Oh man, well, we'll start with the first one. How has gun rights changed in the last 10 years? Man, well, the thing is, I don't even have to go 10 years back. I mean, I can, but really, I think a lot of us, and I hope you know, maybe I just know because I'm a nerd of these things, but post-COVID, COVID to post-COVID, it has changed enormously and for the better, and not only gun rights, but gun demographics as well. So the people who are now gun owners looks almost drastically different than what it looked like before. So just some numbers, for example, again, not saying that these are just because it's a Harvard study or Georgetown study, but I think it just goes to show that regardless if you tend to be anti-gun, which come on, a lot of these institutions are, the facts are the facts. And what is one of the studies, National Firearm study that they had from 2019 to 2021 showed, Harvard showed a study that we had at least 8 million new gun owners in America, first-time gun owners from 2019 to 2021. And of those 8 million, 48% of them are women. So we have an immense amount. And I'm probably going to, but I mean, most of you guys probably already know why it was during COVID, right? For many reasons. For one, a lot of women finally, a lot of them did finally realize and unfortunately have to go through that, where they had to realize that their safety was up to them. And not only not their safety, but also the safety of their family, of their children. And so many women did that. They finally just said, you know what, I'm gonna go and get a firearm this time to protect my family, my home, because look, there's sheriff departments, police departments that are saying like, we can't go, we're not gonna be able to answer every call. You might be by yourself on one call or one situation. So don't let that situation be a fatal one. Be one who's able to be prepared and be able to defend your life and your family in case you have to do so alone. And then also, of those 48% of that 8 million, it's 21% of those women, right? 21% of those women are Black women. So Black women have actually single-handedly by themselves of that cohort been leading the charge in that demographic. So it's just, all these things I know, I've been in the gun industry for almost a decade now, and all those statistics, state by state, they were showing them, there were inklings, but there was never anything solid. But it took COVID and, let's be honest, the government response to COVID for people to realize that it's up to them and they have a right to defend themselves and they should exercise that right that they already have to defend themselves, regardless of the political party that they affiliate with, because it's a human right. And so I think that's what we saw a lot, was a lot of demographics in that sense, but we also saw gun policies that actually changed radically because of that. So, in the last just couple of years alone, we've seen constitutional carry, Texas being one of the bigger ones, right? But they were the 21st state to enact constitutional carry, right? Like, I'm from Texas, gun-ho, love Texas. But we can do better. 21st state constitutional carry, you can do better. But with so many states that were, again, completely against this federal government overreach of telling us how to defend ourselves, telling us what firearms we can have, what, so-called assault weapons bans, etc. So there are all of these states were saying, no, that the government should not be telling me, and also not be putting financial barriers to make it harder for me to defend myself. So, and then also on top of that, we had we had local and state municipalities saying, we're going to defend ourselves from any type of gun safety, quote unquote, or type of gun control measures that the federal government wants to enact. And so they became sanctuary states. They became sanctuary cities where they said, we're going to defund and we're also going to reprimand any type of law enforcement that tries to enact and implement these type of gun control policies in our local and state levels. So that was in just 2 years. Like, we can talk about the decade, but really so much has changed for the better in the last couple of years.
Well, and I would add to that, that a lot of people, we follow what's going on in the Second Amendment world, and we're constantly looking at like what bills are being proposed and what's being voted on in the House and the Senate and all this kind of stuff. Majority of people are not following this. They do not understand how their voting actually could potentially impact and save their life or, have their life taken from them. And a lot of people woke up to that reality during COVID. I can't tell you the number of friends that called me that live out here in California that were enraged when, they were talking about defunding the police in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of riots going on, and people weren't feeling safe in their homes in the suburbs, and they went to go buy a gun, and they called me and said, did you realize that I couldn't take my gun home for 10 days? I'm like, yeah, I did. Like, I've been telling you that. I mean, like, there's still a lot of work to do. We have made some big progress. I think that the Supreme Court ruling that came out that said, yes, you do have a right outside of your home to carry a firearm is going to have some big implications. I think it's going to be a state-by-state thing that's going to take a little bit of time, but people are getting into the fight now because it impacted their life. And if you were one of those people that were impacted by the need to go and buy a firearm and you were met with some barriers and some blockades and things that were really difficult maybe in your state to get your hands on a tool that you needed at that moment, then I would encourage you to really start paying attention to your local elections, your statewide elections, start paying attention to what the politicians, not only what they say in regards to the Second Amendment and firearm laws, but look into their voting record, because you actually have the power to try to change and overturn some of these difficult barriers to getting your concealed carry license. I know there's some counties here that are easier to get them than others, and it all comes down to the elections and who you're voting for. So if this second, like I'm typically a one-issue voter when it comes down to the Second Amendment, because like Antonia said, if we lose the Second Amendment, you lose all of your other rights. That is the one that allows you to protect and defend all of your other liberties and your freedoms. And so, I think people woke up to that. And we still have a lot of work to do, but there are some amazing organizations that are doing it, but the power is going to come in the number of people who join together and say, we needed a gun, or I might need a gun in the future, and it's going to be really difficult for me in some states. So I would just encourage you to rise up and start getting involved and finding out a little bit more about what's going on with the policies that are being enacted in your county and in your state. So that you can make a difference, because you do make a difference. I mean, we saw that. And
just to add to that, and this is, again, and GOA has been very vocal, and we, at the end of the day, we are a Second Amendment focused organization, and we will call out Republican or Democrat, most of the time Democrat, right? But also Republican or any type of politician that's going to say, especially when they say that they're there to defend your Second Amendment, and then they vote a different way. We saw this a lot with red flag laws. We saw this constantly, where people who said they were conservative or said they were pro-liberty even were completely for a policy that has already been in place in states like New Jersey, like a lot of the left coast type of areas. Left coast. That was a Freudian slip. A lot of the coastal type of policies that focus on anti-gun laws. And then we also saw Republicans who were saying they were pro-red flag laws too, when it's completely against the Second Amendment, it's completely against the Fourth, search and seizure, to do no due process. all those things are things that you can call out, especially in the social media age. It doesn't take a big organization, although we love being able to be supported to help us to do more of that stuff, because it's a lot of different things we need to do to do that. But even you, like, make a video, call out your own representative. If you find in their voting record that they said, so-and-so, you said you're gonna protect this right for me, and you voted that way, and you're on a platform that says you're going to vote this way, but you didn't vote this way. What's going on? I mean, it doesn't have to be a video. It could be just showing up, honestly, to their office and asking those questions. Most people don't. That's what the thing is. Most people don't do those little things, and that's how I know I got started. Was that getting irate at the fact that so many people get away with stuff that you shouldn't be getting away with, and that comes down to representatives who don't actually represent me and what I should be talking about. And again, that comes down to 10, 20 years ago, Republican or Democrat, you didn't touch the gun issue. Even Bill Clinton said, like, that's what messed it up for a lot of the Democratic Party at one point, because all these blue dog Democrats, all these people who grew up with firearms as well, they knew not to touch that issue, but there was a radical shift, where most people understood human right-wise, it's a gun issue, but it's not a Democrat-Republican issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an issue of self-defense. They radically politicize that single issue, and it really shouldn't be about that. And I hope we have a resurgence of both sides saying that's a right we need to defend regardless of what side you're on.
Well, and I would say, like, since this is a women's gun rights are women's rights, I would say that there's such an important part that women play in this entire picture as well. Like, we've gotten away from, these are type of conversations that women, when we go out to brunch or we go out to lunch with our girlfriends, we're not sitting around and talking about these type of things. But that is actually a very important thing that you can do with your girlfriends. I realized very quickly as I started getting more vocal about this on social media, as I started to have a platform to talk about this, my friends and girls that I didn't really know were coming out of the woodwork asking me. No, it was pretty funny because we'd go to lunch and they'd go, can we talk for a second? And I was like, oh, I know what's coming. It's about to be the gun conversation, but they got real quiet and they were like, can you teach me how to shoot a gun? And I was like, why are we whispering it? And this is in Texas. Yeah, and I realized right there, we have a really big opportunity as women to share our stories. If you are a woman who has had something happen to you that brought you to your aha moment, people can argue all day long about stats and about political sides on the gun issue, but they can't argue about your story. I mean, you have your story and why you got to the point why you chose what you chose, and you can share that story with them, and you really have an opportunity then, I believe, and a responsibility as a responsible gun owner to push them to go get some training, to invite them along to go to the gun range, invite them to say, hey, I know it can be scary and intimidating. It was for me as well the first time I started picking up firearms, but come with me. I now feel confident with this. I would love to show you it. I would love to teach you. And it's going to be something, I think the movement is really going to happen women to women. And that's when we get more women involved in this movement, then the political side of it, we start to have a bigger shift and a bigger impact. But you can just do your part on an individual level on a daily basis, just with your friends. When this stuff comes up in the news, like the Eliza Fletcher story. Who in here heard about the Eliza Fletcher story? Okay, Eliza Fletcher is a national story over the last several weeks. It was the runner in Tennessee who went out jogging and she was brutally assaulted and murdered. And I mean, you could not turn on your news, you couldn't read a news story without hearing about this. It was horrific and tragic, but it was a perfect opportunity if you've got a friend that's a runner, hey, do you carry any tool with you when you go running? Have you thought about your safety? Did you hear about this story? I would hate for that to happen to you. This is what I carry. This is what I do. And just encourage your friends to start thinking about their safety. in a different way. And that's the opportunity. And like, that's the only silver lining I see with a tragedy like that is that we could maybe turn that into hope for other people, that this doesn't happen to somebody else. And you have a really big opportunity to, that's an easy way to bring up the conversation. Sometimes it might not be normal, but that's an easy way to bring up the conversation in a loving way.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
I will say, I have, after hearing about, this is the first I'm hearing of this story, but that is something that I have also like often thought about as a young woman. I was here last night, 3 a.m, writing my midterm paper that I have to write after this, but I had to walk back to my car by myself across a dark campus that for some reason the school decided to replace all the street lamps with red light bulbs for Red Light Week or something, I don't know.
It's for homecoming.
Oh, is it over?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Is it over yet? Well, again, I'm not a sports person either. But I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with San Diego transit centers, but we have a lot of homeless people who like to hang out at homeless transit centers? That like to hang out at our transit centers. And these people are most of the time on drugs, and while they are struggling, you play a gamble with whether or not they're dangerous. And because I have to walk across this transit center to get to my car, I am putting my life in, I hate to say it, but it's in their hands. Because these people, they're bigger than me and they're on drugs, and by that chemistry, they are stronger than me, much stronger than me than what their normal biological makeup would be. And because this school is a no-gun zone, I'm kind of out of luck. So I do think about that a lot. I think about what would I do in certain situations. I have to alter my walking routes. I have to be mindful of when I'm on campus, what time I'm on campus, and now this time change, it gets darker a lot sooner, but because it's midterms, I have to be here a little longer to study longer. So,
I want to say something about that, because I think
Yes.
you bring up a really good point. People tend to think that those of us who, are gun nuts, or, those of us that carry guns, we do so because we're fearful people, and we're really afraid. So, why are you so afraid? And I look at them, I'm like, I'm actually not afraid of anything, because this, I carry this firearm just like I carry a spare tire in my car. I'm not afraid every day I drive my car that I'm gonna get stranded on the side of the highway if I have a flat tire. Why? Because I'm prepared. And so really, I have the tools, I got what I need, and I leave my house. And it's no different than why I'm carrying my firearm, but the fear actually comes when you're not able to be prepared. More people that once they start, I think, acknowledging reality, and the reality is that there are bad people out there that don't think like we do, they don't act like we do. We can't treat every single person that's out on the road as if they have normal thinking patterns, because they just don't. I think that's very obvious in today's society. And there are some people that want to not face that reality, and they want to live in La La Land, and you know what, they have the right to do that. But for those of us who do acknowledge that reality, you actually have more of a peace of mind that comes when you are prepared and when you can take care of yourself. And, so I hate that. I hate that for the females on these college campuses that deal with that, they really do limit the way that you can protect yourself. And that is more fear-evoking, I believe, than carrying a firearm with you.
you bring up a good point where it's not that I'm fearful. I think about being prepared. The fear comes from being unprepared. And the people who ask, why are you so afraid? These people have an unimaginable amount of faith in humanity. And unfathomable. These people, I refer to them, I don't know if anyone here has read The Coddling of the American Mind. Fantastic book. Talks about why people in my generation, younger or even maybe slightly older than me, have grown up coddled. This is the result of that. Mm-hmm. These people have grown up protected by their parents, and they have no understanding of how cruel and dangerous this world can be. It is sometimes, but when it is, that's when you need to be prepared. So that is the importance of discussions like this, so that I know I need to be prepared. My mom, bless her, I love her to death, raised me to understand that this world can be cruel, can be dangerous, and not everyone can be trusted. Homeless people are, most of the time, drug addicts. Unfortunately, not all of them are like, oh, poor person who is just struggling. They are struggling, but sometimes it's by choice. It is very easy to be homeless out here. That's another conversation. We'll have another panel discussion on homelessness in the spring. But yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
I'll make you a shirt that says that.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Oh, whoops, close out of it. Okay. With the midterm elections just a day away, hope everyone voted or plans to vote tomorrow, liberal politicians are advocating for common sense gun reform. What does that look like, and why is there such a hard push for it? How does this affect our Second Amendment rights?
So the typical common sense gun reform laws, you have to think that the media is the master of spin. And so when they start coming down the pipeline, giving phrases like common sense gun reform, what they really mean is gun control. And they package it in this really pretty nice little package that makes it say, well, if you don't agree with us, well, you must not have common sense. What they typically propose is that we have a universal background check. I mean, doesn't that sound like a great idea? And we just have some red flag laws that, they're really gonna help keep everybody safe. High capacity magazine bans, assault weapons bans, which got voted down, but I'm sure they'll bring it up every year. I'm sure they'll bring it up again. So you hear measures like this over and over. When you really, really hear them, of course, is when we have a tragedy like a school shooting, a mass shooting, and they say, well, why can't we just do something common sense? And look, I am all for stopping bad guys from doing bad things, but not at the risk of infringing on law-abiding citizens. And so the problem here with a lot of these common sense is, first and foremost, they're not common sense. It's actually just a way to start ripping away and chipping away at more of your rights and more of your freedoms, because majority of the gun owners, we're talking about hundreds of millions of gun owners in this country, and they are not doing anything illegal with their firearms. So the bad apples that we have in this country that do things with their firearms in an illegal manner, let me just tell you, are going to continue to do them in an illegal manner regardless of the amount of laws that are put on the books. So the laws that then get put on the books actually restrict you. They restrict me. They restrict you. Why? Because we are law-abiding citizens. We want to obey the law. We want to live within this moral code within our society because majority of us are good people. And so, when they talk about these laws, just be really careful when you hear them, and instead of jumping on the bandwagon, be like, yeah, that universal background check, well, that definitely would have stopped this kid from getting a firearm. I mean, no, it probably wouldn't have. I mean, there's enough guns already out on the street. Short of going door to door and confiscating every single firearm, which is against our Second Amendment right that you were talking about. How does this affect our Second Amendment? How does this affect you and I as law-abiding citizens? Well, short of doing that, there really is no way to clear the street of every single firearm that's out there. So why do we think that more laws on the books are going to do anything? And you look at school shootings, I mean, those are already gun-free zones. It's already illegal to carry a firearm into a school, right? Wouldn't we all agree with that? But who carries firearms into schools? Criminals. People that disregard the law. So anytime the proposed plan is to just put more laws on the books, because that's going to stop the bad guys, it's not. It's not going to stop the evil intentions that are in people's hearts. It's just going to keep you and I from actually being able to exercise our Second Amendment right the way that we want to.
I'm gonna That's awesome. I can't say any better than that.
Why do you think they're so dead set on coming after our right to own firearms? What does it really boil down to? Because as you've said, they say it's for our protection. It's to stop the bad guys. They try to make it seem like it's a good reason. Like they clearly have our best interest in mind here. So what does it come down to? Why do they want to restrict our access to firearms?
Because it's not gun reform, it's not gun control, it's complete elimination of firearms. That is what the real agenda is. So, I mean, that's what I love about, if you read even the transformation of the gun control industry, of the gun control movement, of even if you're looking at, say, even like 1980s, right, 1970s, really big push on the gun rights side for concealed carry. And then you see in 1980s this huge push. You see the Brady campaign, which was really the coalition, which their name literally says was coalition against handguns, right? They were big against handguns. You saw all of these different types of gun control organizations today in that time were very focused on handguns, because handguns were the firearm that they wanted to completely ban and do away with. So it was common sense of what type of gun control reforms are handguns, because that was the big predator, right? That was what was killing people on the streets, handguns. But then if you look at any type of articles or any type of titles today, it's always the rifle. It's assault weapons ban. It's AR-15. I'm sorry to... Hell no, you know, we're gonna take away your AR-15s and your AK-47s, better work, right? A person who is running it for governor in Texas right now. That is the movement that we've seen today, but yet they were doing the same things. You know, they'll say, oh yeah, handguns are fine, right? They're great, but I have a handgun too. I'm a firearm owner myself. But I'm really for ARs. I'm really against ARs. No, it doesn't matter if it's an AR platform or a handgun platform, or it's for hunting or not for hunting. It's always a different type of spin on the narrative of, I don't trust you as an individual to make the decision of what firearm is best for you, for your home, and for your needs. I'm gonna dictate as the government and as an individual, because that's the representative of every government, right, an individual. And based on my background and what I think I should have and what you shouldn't have, that is the law that I wanna dictate towards you. So that is really the core foundation of all of it. Whether it's gonna look different ways, it's gonna be called common sense gun reform, it's gonna be called gun safety. I mean, goodness gracious, every town for gun safety, right? Every town, it's a big gun control organization, is doing essentially what we're doing right now with gun trainings. They're literally holding female gun trainings and firearm education for women. But at the end of the day, they're completely against what allows these women to be able to have those firearms in the first place, for everyday people to have firearms. So it's going to look so pleasing to the eye. It's going to be packaged in a way that's relevant for that time period. And also, honestly, what is piggybacking to the latest tragedy is always going to be something that's packaged in that way. But it's to fool you from the very core of, they do not believe you have an individual right to defend yourself and to make that decision for yourself, what is best for you.
And if you think that the government is your friend and your savior, and that they are going to look after you and they're the ones who are going to keep you safe, all you have to do is open your eyes and look and see what just happened in COVID. Do you think they have the capacity? I mean, first off, they're defunding the police, and then they don't care about your safety. This has nothing to do about your safety. That's the first thing that we all have to get in line on, is that this, every time for gun safety and keeping our communities safer by removing the firearms, has nothing to do with keeping you safe. They don't care if you're safe. And they don't care if you're cities burn, they don't care if your police are defunded, they literally don't care that you're safe, but people want to, at their core, they want to feel safe. And so if somebody is telling them that they're gonna look after them and they're gonna do it for them, that sounds a lot easier than taking personal responsibility for your safety and for your family's safety. And I think that's, too, a lot of what we're dealing with. That is kind of a mentality that we're dealing with in this country, is this lack of personal responsibility for yourself, for your freedom, for your family. And, I pray that it doesn't take something tragic to get people to move to that understanding that you really are your first line of defense. And when seconds matter, even if you do have a lot of cops in your area, the cops are still minutes away. And God bless our cops. I mean, they do the best that they can, but they can't be everywhere all at one time. And it's ultimately, it's control and it's power, and you cannot control somebody that can fight back on an equal playing field with you. And so you just look back at history. This is why history is so important, to see every country that did disarm their society and the people in their country before they took full power and control. And I know people want to say that is a crazy notion. Our government is never going to want to just take full control and take all of your guns away from you. Well, just watch what they're doing and listen to what they're doing, and you will quickly see that that really is ultimately what they want. They don't want you to be able to fight back. They don't want you to be able to defend yourself. They want you to be completely reliant and dependent on them. And, the only way that you really have your ultimate freedom is to protect your life, because that's all you got.
That brings me to a follow-up question, because when you said that made me think of when Biden gave one of many interesting speeches, where he said, well, you might have your guns, but we have tanks and
Helicopters.
F-15s. I nearly said F-150, and then I remembered that's the car. Then probably, but what would you say to someone with that stance? Like, oh, well, you can have as many handguns and AR-15s as you want, but at the end of the day, the government has drones, they have tanks, and they have nukes, and you don't stand a chance against that. What do you say to people who are on that side?
Yeah, I ultimately, it comes down to what the firearm represents for the American people, and that's liberty, and that's freedom. And, you're right. Is my gun probably gonna be able to take out a tank? No, it's not going to. But there's a lot more American citizens than there are tanks and drones. And, and look, do I think that we're headed in that direction right this second in our country? I don't think that. Do you think that? I don't know where. I don't. But what lessens that threat is having an armed society and having people that can, ultimately stand up and fight back when something's trying to be taken away from them. I think it's really ultimately just trying to chip away at your liberties and your freedoms so that you don't really care about them, so that when it does come time to stand up and to fight for what is important, do you really care? Are you really going to be ready for that? And if you don't have your firearm to be able to stand up to protect your liberties and what you're willing to fight for, then what are you really going to do?
Yeah, I think it comes down to something that I say recently, like even in the last 5 years. The reason why, and this is why it's so important, if you hear anything from me today or anything from this conversation that we're having, regardless if you're pro-gun or pro-Second Amendment, please know this, because this is what the determining factor that I usually see when it comes down to the people who, I'll go, for example, go to a gun show or a gun range or whatever, and they always, if they don't have this understanding of the Second Amendment, they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm for the Second Amendment, I think we should have these guns, but, right? But we don't need assault weapons, we don't need ARs, no one needs weapons of war, that terminology. And that was part of that, again, that was my journey as well. Like I said, I went from being anti-gun 10 years ago to, being the National Director of Women's Outreach for GOA, Guns of America. And Guns of America is that is our slogan, no compromise, and that is the reason why we're no compromise is because we believe that the Second Amendment, and it is, although self-defense, and I push self-defense as very important, that was a big part of my story, it's very important, it is, and hunting is great, and it's important for us to keep and protect that ability to do that, but those things are not the important part of the Second Amendment. Okay, please hear me, not saying that those things are not important. I'm saying they're not the key focus of the Second Amendment. And why does that matter? It matters because the key focus of the Second Amendment is to enable we the people to protect us from a tyrannical government. To keep and bear arms should not be infringed. That pre-existing right that we already have, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Arms, to bear arms. So to answer your question, honestly, it's more like, yeah, you're right, why not? Why don't we have those tanks and those drones and etc.? Because there is a very clear misunderstanding of what the Second Amendment is. Again, it's the whole window, right? I think it's overturned, I'm messing it up, window of like the whole idea of if you can change the narrative at the top of what is, like she said, common sense, or what is normal. There are so many gun laws that even today that we think are just background checks, etc. The NICS background check, all those things are modern gun law restrictions that did not take place decades and decades ago. Just talk to people who have guns, 1950s, etc. Like all of these type of policies were put into place not too long ago, relatively, when it comes to our gun history. So, but we've become so ingrained in our mind and our ideas and thinking that those are just normal, and therefore we go on to the next thing because that's never gonna be changed, because we have an idea of what normal is that honestly has been dictated and narrated by anti-gun people. And we just react as gun control or gun rights people. So the biggest thing is to know your history, know what the Second Amendment is about. And that is going to help you realize that honestly, it's the government trying to dictate what arms are normal for you as a citizen, because they want to be able to have the power over you. And if we continue to let go of our rights and just let them go, we're always gonna be in a situation where we're never able to actually rise against a tyrannical government if that ever becomes an issue again. So that's the chipping away of our issues. Yeah.
That kind of brings me to my next question. So what are some of the ways that pro-Second Amendment politicians and organizations like Gun Owners of America are making a difference in protecting our right to bear arms?
Where do I start? Oh man, I mean, we're in everything, but the biggest things that we've been doing, I mean, we see it with the Supreme Court cases. I mean, we have lawyers, it doesn't have these Supreme Court cases. I mean, the thing is, most people see the Supreme Court case, and that's the big thing. But there's so many different levels of the criminal justice system and the court systems, and honestly, those court systems, the district court, all of those type of things, really on those levels are what really impacts you as an individual. The most, locally, state. So we're on the federal level, but we're also on the state level. So we have state directors and regional directors who are working legislation, who are pushing constitutional carry. Like we've been pushing, look back, I mean, we started in 1975, but look back, we've always been that, like I said, that narrative pusher of no compromise, of constitutional carry, where even other gun, quote unquote, Second Amendment organizations thought it was a little too radical to be constitutional carry that honestly just says in its name, goes back to the Constitution. But that was radical for some. I started out as a campus carry activist. And I remember even at that time, GOA was the only one who was fully on board with me because I was this radical girl who just, was anti-gun, who was passionate about making sure that students have the right to carry on college campuses. And guess what? Texas became a campus carry state. And that was part of my focus because I knew as an individual how important it was to me, but that was radical for some. So like GOA has always been pushing that narrative of no compromise, because honestly, it's just going back to the very elementary principles of the Second Amendment, which so many people have twisted and changed to suit them and what they need. So that with outreach, what we're doing on the hunters program, the Second Amendment, there's so many hunters in America. Unfortunately, a lot of them, they grew up that way. It's a culture. A lot of them just never been really part of the Second Amendment fight, and we're getting those people and activating those people because they're great voters. And then also another way is through student programs, through student outreach. We have Courtney Parker, who is our amazing student programs director behind us. And please talk to her after this if you want to get more involved in the student programs side of GOA. We're doing that with women, with my Empower 2A is now with GOA as the Women's Outreach Program. But again, we're also with our lawyers and doing everything on the state and local and federal level, pushing against the gun rights, pushing against the gun laws that we have, and pushing more gun rights on each level.
Okay. On the inverse side of that, do you remember a specific experience that you had either with a anti-gun politician or anti-gun organization that you? Oh wait, I'm sorry. I said that question wrong. My apologies. Do you remember a specific experience where you wish that the pro-Second Amendment movement had done something differently? If you could go back to that point in time, what would you have done differently? I know you mentioned Texas being a little late in the game to being a constitutional carry state.
Are you talking like specifically Texas?
Or just, I know that you had mentioned that earlier, but if you could think of something else.
So the pro-Second Amendment movement, like what I wish that they would have done differently. I mean, really, honestly, that was always pro-Second Amendment to push constitutional carry, but it was the politicians taking their time to not do what is they deemed popular. So I think that's what, unfortunately, what we see and why we need people to call out both sides. Maybe I'll just start with that we just need more people to stop thinking that just because you have one favorite politician and you're really rooting for them, you have to look at how they vote. They are going to talk a big talk, but at the end of the day, if they're not voting in the way that aligns with, and we do that at GOA, we will endorse candidates and we have the checklist and we make sure that the surveys that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and if they have a voting record, we're going through it and we're gonna call them out regardless of what letter is behind their name. And that is what we have to do. No more of this, you're on this side, tribalism. It's call out the people that need to be called out when they need to be. Obviously, have your facts to back it up, have your records, but at the end of the day, don't be afraid, because it's going, especially, let's just say on our side, even if you're, for example, a Republican, if you're calling out those people who are not following the platform of your party, then at least you're making your party a better party. If you really want to be a Republican, if you really want to be a Democrat, call out the people who are not doing those things and call out those bad apples, because if not, they will continue to do what they can to gain power and not have the responsibility of representing you and your principles and what's best for America. So I just say start with that.
What I wish I would have seen the Second Amendment community do better and do it sooner was join Americans together. You know, we tend to a lot of times, like in the gun industry or in the 2A community, forget about certain populations, and we don't think that they're as important as other populations. And maybe that's because, this group typically votes this way or this group votes this way. And I would have liked to, I think we're making some headway within this where we aren't segmenting out groups and playing identity politics, but I think we are starting to see more and more people come together on this issue. And I'm glad that it's happening now, but I would have liked to have seen it sooner. I would have liked to see some leadership in big organizations like the NRA, like do a better job of reaching out to these marginalized, I mean, I guess they looked at them as marginalized groups, or maybe they looked at them as groups that just really couldn't have impacted their movement, when there really were a lot of us, like women were marginalized. I know you talked about Black women at one point, like, you know, those are groups that just hadn't really been reached out to and mobilized in a strategic way. And I think that, you know, so I'm thankful for what you guys are doing, and you individually as well, but I think we're starting to see that, so I hope that it continues.
One thing that I noticed that the liberal side is really good at is mobilizing people. And they do that by appealing to emotions to get reactions out of people, to either scare them into voting for their side or just scare them into doing something else, or something that fits along their agenda. Do you think that the pro-Second Amendment movement doesn't do enough to appeal to emotions, to get people to understand the importance of their Second Amendment right? Not necessarily to do what the left does in scaring people into voting for them, but...
Yes, I will weigh in on that, because it's something that I do see a lot of times within the Second Amendment community, and I have even found myself doing this, is that we try to appeal head to head a lot of times when it comes to when there's a tragedy. You know, a lot of times we want to just start throwing facts out there real quickly about how more gun laws won't save more lives. And while, I mean, we're right, and it is true, we could do a better job of trying to have like actual conversations with people. And when you say like appeal to the emotional side, I do think there is a way to appeal to the emotional side and start to have these conversations with people. That's why I'm so big on like having individual conversations. I do a lot of commentating on Second Amendment stuff on a national platform, but the most important conversations that I feel like I'm having is when I'm transforming and talking and changing hearts and minds. And so I do think that we have some opportunity and some work to do there. While I do think the facts are very important, I do think that we could start to have, I guess emotional conversations isn't necessarily like the right word, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like actually opening up and trying to dialogue back and forth, and then have the opportunity to hit them with the truth, you know, at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what I've seen, and hopefully it's changed in like the last couple of like few years or so. But this whole, either a polarization of like either you're for facts or you're against feelings, like that type of. I mean, especially from someone who came from the left, and I mean that's the thing is there's no. All these people are bad and they have nothing right in what they're doing. Obviously, like you said, they're mobilizing for a reason. They're mobilizing young people. They're mobilizing people who look more like me. I mean, just be honest here. And I saw that, but again, like you were saying, to what end? Like what means? And the thing is that we don't have to completely negate and reject that side just because on the other side. At the end of the day, though, just scientifically, just even if we're just thinking about persuasiveness, of persuasive writing, right? Like you need the emotional side, you need the credibility, you need the facts, you need all of them together to be able to be a persuasive person, an individual. And I mean, even in my time in the two-way world, and I keep saying the two-way world, we're talking a very specific part of the two-way world. A part that most of it, I don't even know yet, right? Because there's so many people with different backgrounds, different ideas. I hate to say it, guys. Some people, it's the first time you ever heard this, but there are actually liberal gun owners. I mean, there are people and who decide to stay that way. Whether you agree or not, there are people who are in their own field or in their own way of life, and they're gun people. And so in my sliver of the gun world and my ideas of gun world, I found that it's so much more important for us to realize that we're really, yes, the facts and the stuff matter, but I've been doing speeches and outreach and everything, time and time again, the thread is my story. is I'm reiterating my story over and over again, is talking about my story thousands of times on TV, on groups like this, and talking to people in speeches, is telling my story. And to know that for me, it's been thousands of times, but for most people, it's the first time they ever heard it, or it's the first time, I mean, you're talking about, that you don't ever want to be able to have that conversation because someone realized that they're pro-gun because of a tragedy. But the unfortunate reality is that, especially most women, I'm talking to domestic violence survivors, I'm talking to sexual assault survivors, I'm talking to people who have incredible stories that they're not ready to share yet. And they may never share, and they don't have to, but they resonate with mine or Amy or someone who's able to share, who's at the point in their life that they can share and they can secretly resonate. And they don't need to tell anybody about it, but at least they know there's somebody else who's dealing with the same things that they dealt with, and they're on the other side. And I think that is so important for us to remember, that you can say the same thing over and over again, but there's someone who needs to hear it, and they're gonna hear it for the first time. So that's important for us to remember.
Next question. What would you say is some important changes that we must make to secure the future of our gun rights? I know that's like a very big question, but what like sticks out to you the most? Like, what changes can we make, the biggest ones that we can make to secure or expand our Second Amendment rights?
Well, I really think you cannot underestimate the importance of exercising that right. The more armed Americans, the better. The more trained armed Americans, the better. And you can't underestimate that. There's going to be power in numbers when it comes to the attempts of the government to take away those rights. And so I just think that, you've got to get out there and exercise it, whatever that looks like for you and for, the state that you live in. I know it's a little bit easier, like in a state like Texas, to buy certain firearms and to conceal or to carry them, or, than it might be in California, but you can still do your part here in California. You can be a part of the conversation, and you can't underestimate how important it is to vote. I mean, I think you guys have a big local election that's coming up here in San Diego. To my knowledge, I am no expert on San Diego law, but we talk about knowing the voting records of who you're going into place. So the local sheriff, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've got some very big experts right over here from Gun on a Radio that could probably help us out with this. But the sheriff is a very big, important part and piece to helping you get your license to carry. And that election is going on tomorrow, right? So that's very important. And there's a woman, I don't remember her, it's a woman, right? Yes, I don't remember her name.
Kelly Martinez.
Go up and ask these people afterwards. But she is very pro helping people get their license to carry, and it might shock some people to know that she's not Republican. And so that is, those are like very important things to know when you're going to vote, because those do make a difference and they do make an impact. And so little by little, you can start to chip away at that when you put the right people in office. And we have enough people that the Second Amendment is important to them. And they get out there and they go and they vote and they do something about it.
Yeah, it's a big question there's so many things, right? Like, well, you can do this. But I think about like what I tell myself, right? Because it can get so overwhelming, and also there's so many times where you're just like, I'm over this, right? Because you've had one too many trolls on social media, you're done, you're just like, oh, why am I doing this? I think everyone has that in whatever field they're in. But this is a passion project. I'm passionate about this. I'm always going to be, regardless if I'm in the industry or not, or whether I'm I have a title or not. I've been doing this before I was paid or when I'm paid. This is important to me regardless in my everyday life. So when it comes down to it, it always comes down to, for me, did I change one person's life? Like, can I remember one person's life that I changed through what I did, being there, by talking to them? Guys, we don't have to talk about politics for that to be a change, obviously. But when it comes down to it, for us to expand and to get more people, especially in this time, like I said, we had 8 on that's the conservative number, right? 8 million new gun owners, probably way more than that if we're looking at the actual numbers, but we're looking at studies like from Harvard and Georgetown. But for the most part, we have a huge cohort of people who are new gun owners who didn't have the opportunity to train for a couple years, by the way, and who are looking for people to help them and to get them involved. Just because they became gun owners, again, there's a big tactic of push and narrative of people who are anti-gun, who are pro-gun control, who are saying, look, I'm a gun owner, and trying to add that credibility to then saying, but this is why we should restrict this, and this type of right. So being a gun owner is not where it stops. It's where it starts. And then we have an opportunity to educate and a responsibility to educate and to take those people along and want them to be involved to expand the rights that we, again, were born with. So we have to go back to that it's not this crazy notion that we can get way more people to be on our side and to want to help fight. Because we can have a lot of people who are just the same 10 or 20 people who are speaking on this issue. If we don't get more people on our side,